Miss Godfrey, thank you for coming on board with Chasing Truth. How are you doing today?
Well, you're welcome. The pleasure is mine, Shawn, and thanks very much for asking me.
Oh, well, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's coming up with you other than the bio I just read about you? I know that you've got a couple of public appearances that's coming up pretty soon.
Right. I'm going to be at the Michigan Paracon in Sault Ste. Marie, coming right up, about two weeks, I think. And that's going to be a lot of fun. You can find it just MI Paracon. Just Google that and it'll pop up. But I'm going to be on a panel on cryptids on Saturday with Lauren Coleman and another guest and so that's going to be a lot of fun. And there's so many celebrities coming there. I'm almost overwhelmed. I'm like, I'm not worthy. I'm not Josh Gates and just about anybody you can think of in the crypto world is going to, and paranormal world, I think too, is going to be there. So that's great. And then I'm going to be at CryptidCon, which is down in Frankfort, Kentucky. My first time speaking in that state, so I'm really excited about that too. And that is on a Saturday. And again, you can just pretty much Google cryptidcon.com and find it. It's one that I think is going to be very well attended, and that's Saturday, September 8th and 9th. And I'm going to be again speaking on Saturday. So both of those things are going to be a lot of fun. I'm also going to be at one at the Milwaukee Paracon in October, and then in the first week of November, there's a brand new one coming up in a little place called Bowler, Wisconsin. And it's at a very nice big casino, which has great facilities for this sort of thing. So I've got 4 of those and some library slots coming up. I've got a new book that's going through, being ground through the torturous procedure of getting edited and that sort of thing at the publisher. So it's not going to be up for a little while because that process really takes some time to get it polished, all polished and shiny like it should be. But I have other requests from publishers for different little things, so I keep pretty busy. Not to mention going out in the field, trying to find the time for that as well, because I do enjoy doing a lot of field work and research.
Oh, awesome. How in the world do you do all these things? Write books? I hear that you have another book that's coming onto the plate, so to speak, in 2019. Can you mention that, or is it still hush-hush?
Yeah, that's the one I was just kind of mentioning.
Okay.
And I can't, it took us 2 months, me and the publisher, to decide on a title for it. We finally got that a few weeks ago. And I can't really say a lot about it, except there are going to be some chapters on things that I've kind of been researching quietly as different examples have come in. A couple of chapters on things I've really never written about in the cryptid world before, but I just stumbled across some great knowledge bases. So I think people are going to really enjoy that one. It's going to be quite different and more on the strange side too, which just seems to be a general trend. That I used to just get sightings that were mostly, I saw this thing, it looked like a really giant wolf standing on its hind legs, and then it ran off. But I have a lot more now where I actually think people are feeling bolder to report this sort of stuff, where things that we might call supernatural or see as supernatural, I'm not sure they always are, but that definitely seem on the stranger side, are popping up more and more. And again, I think a lot of times those may have existed in previous reports, but people have told me later, I sent this to you, but I just didn't want to say the whole thing because I was afraid you would think it was all crazy, if you read this part too.
Wow, I'm sure you get your spidey sense tingling if it is not, if it's close to not being true. I'm sure you've developed that.
Well, it's impossible for me to completely vet everything because obviously I can't do a polygraph. They cost usually about $1,000 a piece for a good one to be done on someone, and I don't have any sort of capitalization like that to do that. And people can beat polygraphs too. There are ways. So even those aren't foolproof. But what I do is I do have something of a spidey sense that I developed working for 10 years at a newspaper where I was interviewing 2 to 3 people a week, usually on various kinds of topics, almost never on cryptids. I wrote one major story and then a couple of little updates during those 10 years. But you develop the habit of looking things up when people give you little incidental additions to the story or mention a place or a year. You can go and look it up and see if that would have been possible, or if a certain phenomena appeared on that same night. You can go. Now we have great databases in terms of solar flares and full moons and half moons, moon phases, all those kinds of things. You can go look those up now. If somebody says, I know that it was January 31st and there was a full moon, and you go look it up and say there was a new moon, so you know that it really wasn't as light as the person thought. Things like that, that you can check out.
Yes, I've actually done that with a couple of stories I've come across, and I've actually referenced your blog, actually. So thank you for having that blog. It's at lindagodfrey.com.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I actually have one question from one of my followers on Twitter. Her handle is Pika94. And what she wants to ask is, what is Linda's opinion on the Gable film? The Gable film is a home movie that was purportedly documents a Dogman attack back in the early 70s, around the 70s. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I like to say that when it comes to this one, I don't really have an opinion. I have knowledge, because the man who perpetrated this whole thing chose me as one of the people that he wanted to bring it out with way back in, 2007. And I have this really well documented. Excuse me, I'm turning away to grab something behind me here. So, yeah, what I did was I like to keep hard copies of things when I can. And this was one that just for some reason would have been the first message. It was sent to an antique Yahoo group way before Facebook groups. Probably a lot of your listeners never even knew those existed, but Yahoo groups were kind of big, back in that time. And I had one called Unknown Creature Spot, which is now a Facebook group. And I knew Steve, the man who brought this out, because he was a DJ that way back in 1992, when the Beast of Bray Road story kind of hit AP and people around the country started hearing about it, he called me from Michigan and said, hey, we have one of those here too. We have lots of those here. We call him the Dogman. And we kind of exchanged information, and I considered him a friend, and we corresponded every once in a while when something new would come up. And so this was about sometime later, Sunday, September 9th, 2007. And he wrote this message to that group. I'm reading it from a hard copy I printed off way back when. And he said, hi, group. Some of you may remember that a few months ago, I'd been shown a few seconds of an old 8mm film that purports to show a Dogman. So I take that back. It's not the very first. The very first one just fell off and is on the floor, but it's one of the very first. After a lot of wrangling, I finally obtained the rights to the entire film from the current owner. I must say it's quite startling. I put together a short documentary, about 4 minutes, and before it's released to the public, I'd like to hear from this group. This is a private preview for UCS members only. So please don't pass the URL around. But of course, he made it public, not too long after that. But basically, I guess I had been contacted earlier, as had several other known researchers, and he wanted our opinions. And I think he was hoping to get a stamp of approval so he could say, well, all these people agreed that it was a Dogman. And none of us could do that because it was just so blurry, and there were a lot of questions about it, that my answer, the only answer I could give him was, wow, this is interesting, but I just don't have any way of validating it because you can't exactly see what's happening. And also, it does look like it could be an animal, but it never stands up. So how would we know if it was a Dogman? And I still think that's a key question. Well, as it turned out, things went on, and it remained a mystery. And I was actually, at the time I received this document and some others, I had a very, very dangerous and aggressive form of cancer at that time. So it wasn't like this was something my mind was fully on. And, and in fact, in order to fight it, I had really the most stringent chemo that you could have. I had radiation, I had surgery, I had another year of more chemo. So that's what I'm going through, and all this time he's continuing to ask me, don't you think it's real? What do you think? And finally, one night, I happened to be listening to a podcast by somebody, and the producer of Monster Quest, who I still count as my friend, happened to be their guest. And I knew that they had the equipment to maybe finally put this thing to rest. And I called into the show, actually, and said, hey, it was Doug Hychek. And I said, how about if you guys investigated this Gable film? Because you've got all the cameras and the whatever you need in the world in terms of electronic equipment and the technicians to really see what it is. And so he thought that sounded really interesting, and he took it up and they actually had planned to put it on the Monster Quest TV show. But before they could actually do that, right after he was called, Steve was called by Doug Hychek and asked to be on a TV show, he confessed to the Monster Quest producer, and he called me and also confessed to me. And I had the name of the man who actually made the film as a joke, and then it was edited. In the original one, there was a scene where the so-called Dogman stands up, puts on glasses, and waves at the camera, which was meant by the original person to be sort of a joke, kind of a fun thing, because he just loved the legend of the Michigan Dogman and wanted it to go on. And they both felt like it had kind of gone too far. And Steve is not. I think he's an upstanding person, and he was trying to get more publicity for this animal shelter that he'd been helping fund with sales of the Dogman Legend CD that he made. And that's what he said was his whole thing. But they both still agreed to be on the Monster Quest show. They both agreed to confess on air so that people could hear them say it and explain what happened. We went to the cabin this is a little one-story house where Mike, the maker of the film, lived out in the sticks, and it was he had all of his 1970s snowmobiles that he collects, and all of the props, the camera that was used, the mask that was shown with the teeth supposedly clamping over the camera, all that stuff was right there. I took my own photographs of it, which I've published. I think they're on my blog and a couple of other places. And so people can see, that these were props that were the same ones used in the movie. And that was what there was to it. There wasn't any government cover-up. I can tell you that. And I'm not one that defends government all the time. I do think that various governmental agencies sweep stuff under the rug when it comes to cryptids and various incidents. And they actually have some good reasons for that too. It makes researchers and anyone who's interested upset to learn that there are files we can't see. But I think that some of them are afraid that if word gets out, they're going to be just swamped with people coming and looking, and it's going to cost them money for extra manpower and money to run any sort of a hunt or even just looking for it for whatever. It all costs money. I think that's probably a big reason that officials hide things. But for this one, there wasn't even really anything. The place where it happened was so unspecified and really kind of secluded up in Michigan. So I don't think that would have been a big factor. But, I can tell you that it was confessed to have been made up, and that's how it is. I don't think these two men would have committed perjury or whatever you would want to call it. Maybe it's not legally perjury if it's not in court, but that they would have lied on film like that. I just don't think so. And I don't think either of them are terrible, bad people. They just kind of got in over their head with something that seemed like a good idea in the beginning.
Wow, that is interesting. I've heard about the story for many years, since Monster Quest is when I actually got on board with the story. So have you come across any other person or persons that have tried to do something similar to this hoax?
Not on that scale, and I asked I have to also say that really, I think in the high 90s percentage of people who contact me and most other researchers, they're really believable and sincere, and not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. But there are always those few that you have to watch for. And it does happen, but nobody's ever, that I know of, put anything so well orchestrated, and edited and persistent about as this one.